Welcome to 100 Yards of Football. I'm your host, Vincent Turner. And today, my video is going to be on the 1978 college football season. I'm going to recap the teams that made it happen that year in 1978. So if you like the video this morning, please come in and share it. I'm Vincent Turner, 100 Yards of Football. 1978. Boy, that was a special year in my life. I was an 18-year-old freshman attending the University of Arkansas. Not on a football scholarship, just a student. But I was a very student that loved the game. And that year was special. Let's start with the teams that was ranked at the top of the year in 1978. Number 1 was Alabama. Number 2 was the University of Arkansas. Number 3 was Penn State. Number 4 was Oklahoma. Number 5 was Notre Dame. Number 6 was Michigan. Number 7 was the Ohio State Buckeyes. Number 8, the Texas Longhorns. Number 9, the mighty USC Trojans. And coming in at number 10, to open the college football season in 1978 was the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But what happened that year, and it ended in 1978, we had 2 national champions. So let's start with the month of September. The kickoff weekend, September the 2nd, the game of the day was number 1 Alabama taking on number 10 Nebraska at night. Alabama won that game 20-3. And you know what? Their defense was fabulous. When I say fabulous, they held Nebraska to 110 yards rushing, 3 yards point carry. And the main thing about that night, Barry Krause, Marty Lyons, E.J. Jr. put on the show. The following weekend, September the 9th, we had an upset. Missouri came out of nowhere, a team led by Phil Bradley, a legend that was going to be a Hall of Fame in the National Football League, Kellen Winslow Sr., and a running back named James Wilder, as they went in the South Bend and upset number 5 Notre Dame 3-0 that evening. They held Joe Montana to 151 yards passing. That was September the 9th. Then September the 16th, we had some very special. Missouri jumped in the top 20 that year, that week. They came in number 17. And they was entertaining Alabama, who was ranked number 1. And you know what happened? The Tide scored 20 straight points in that game as Alabama showed the nation why they was number 1. E.J. Jr. had a block punt that went for a 39-yard touchdown in that game. Roll Tide. Then September the 23rd, oh my God, it was the game of the week. Birmingham, Alabama. The Alabama Crimson Tide coming in number 1. ABC. Those lights, and they playing a mighty team out of L.A. Showtime, Hollywood, the USC Trojans. And you know what happened in that game? Unfortunately, Alabama got pushed back. It was a young man from San Fernando, California. Charles White had 199 yards rushing, but it was the USC defense that forced 6 turnovers that game, 4 interceptions. A defense that had Gary Carr, 2 NFL Hall of Famers, Dennis Smith, my man, Ronnie Lott, and my man who's a first-round draft choice of the Cleveland Browns, Chip Banks. Rolling out the month of September 1978, September the 30th, the Texas Longhorns came in ranked number 6 in the country, and they wanted to make some noise. And the Texas boys had 3 Jones brothers, Lamb, Ham, and Lamb. And you know what happened? Ham Jones had 135 yards rushing. As Texas proved to the nation on September the 30th, they was a team that I need to start looking at as they beat Texas Tech 24-7. The month of October, the Longhorns, they moved up to 6th in AP poll. And you know what? The new number 1 team coming into October was Sooner, the University of Oklahoma, the Red River Shootout, and the Cotton Bowl, in Dallas, Texas. And everybody know how big this game is. You got 50% OU fans on one side of the field, and you got 50% of Texas fans on the other side of the field. And to be honest, I thought Texas was going to make a statement. But hold up. However, Oklahoma showed you why that was number 1 that year. and they had moved into the number 1 spot in October. Billy Sims, who will go on and win the Heisman Trophy, had 135 yards rushing. The Boomer Sooner Wishbone was rolling with Thomas Lott, Kenny King, David Overstreet. And you know what was funny about that? All those guys I just mentioned out of Oklahoma backfields, they were from the state of Texas. But it was their defense that took the show outside Billy Sims. They forced 5 turnovers, and that defense was led by George Crummy and Darryl Hunt. Then on October the 14th, we had a little change, or something that changed in the AP poll that week. LSU came in at number 11. They had a running back by the name of Charles the Great Alexander. And throughout the week, they was making noise. On October the 14th, they had moved up to the number 11 in the poll. But let me stop that. That team over there in Athens, and we at 100 yards of football, we broadcasting about an hour from Athens. The Georgia Bulldogs pulled up an upset as they went in and beat LSU in Baton Rouge that night, 24-17. And the play of the game on the October 14th, that hot night down in Baton Rouge, was Run Lindsey Scott, Run Lindsey Scott. He had a 99-yard kickoff return to start the second half. Willie McClendon had 144 yards. And you know what? LSU stepped back as their national championship hopes were destroyed. But it was another game that was going on in Tempe, Arizona. The mighty USC Trojans, who had moved up in the polls, those ranked number 4 in the country, they went out to the desert and got spanked by an Herald Arizona State team and a defensive end, Errol Harris, that put on this show as they had 6 sacks on their USC offense. But most of all, their quarterback, Mark Malone, balled out, 139 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So we had 2 upsets on October the 14th. Then, October the 21st, at the time, I was on the campus of the University of Arkansas. Arkansas was number 3 in the country. And you should have been up there in October. Everywhere there was hog heads. Everywhere you could feel the excitement. And everywhere I went during that week of October the 21st, going to the student union every morning, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 9:30, all you can hear is Suey Razorbacks. As Arkansas on October 21st played the biggest game of their season that year as they traveled to Texas. Texas had regrouped. Arkansas was number 3, Texas was number 8. But it just didn't happen. The Jones guys, not brothers, I had mentioned their brothers, but they weren't brothers. Lamb scored 2 touchdowns. Jam had a phenomenal game at the wide receiver position. And Jam Jones had 69 yards rushing as Texas upset Arkansas 28-21. And the dreams for the University of Arkansas started to dwindle. And basically, it was probably over. But the end of the month of October, October the 28th, even though the Razorbacks lost to Texas 28-21 the following week, there was still some talk on the campus up there in northwest Arkansas, in the mountains. The Arkansas still had a chance. And they went to the Astrodome, the third wonder of the world, to play the Houston Cougars. And they got ripped 20-9. And all I remember about that football game, the Cougars under Bill Yeoman had a very offense that was high octane. And when I say that, they had 2 running backs, and I still could see them in my sleep. Randy Love, who had over 120 yards rushing, and Emmett King, who had 123 yards rushing. And Danny Davis, their quarterback, was one of the best in the country as Houston upset Arkansas 20-9. In 1978, the national championship hopes were over for the University of Arkansas. Then we're going to the month of November. Very critical here because you want to know why. The teams will start jockeying and the pretenders are out of the way and the people that about that life are finna step forefront. Let's start with number 4. Penn State is ranked number 3. They play a very fine, tough Maryland team that comes in at number 5. And you know what? The team out of the East, right outside Philly, right up there in Beaver Falls, proved to the nation they belong. Chuck Facina threw for 243 yards and a 69-yard touchdown to Tom Donovan as Penn State defeated Maryland that day, 27-3. Then the following weekend, November 11th. I remember this game so vaguely. It was on a Saturday. It was an overcast day. I was in Buchanan Drake Hall. Well, I say at least 50 other guys watching this football game. It was must-see TV because Oklahoma was number 1. Nebraska had moved up to number 4. The tidbit of this game, Tom Osborne had never beat Oklahoma in his years coaching since he took over the job in 73. And boy, all you can think about was Billy Sims from Hooks, Texas, and that Oklahoma wishbone. Billy Sims put on the show. He had 153 yards rushing. But you know what? It wasn't enough because that day, Oklahoma had 9 fumbles. They lost 6. And they ended up getting upset by Nebraska that day, 17-14. And Nebraska was led by a guy out of Texas. They called him White Lightning, Rick Barnes, who had over 130 yards rushing. But what was so devastating about that football game was this. Oklahoma moved the ball up, down the field. But they had 9 fumbles. And Billy Sims had the most critical fumble of the game. He fumbled inside the 5-yard line with over 3 minutes to go, trying to fight for yardage. And all the guys that was watching that football game that day with me, Victor Moss, Earl Flowers, Larry Cooper, Riley Richardson. Oh, man, all of us was upset for the rest of the day when we went to the dining hall to get our final lunch at 4:30. Boomer Sooner upset by Nebraska on November 11th. So, all eyes turned to November 18th. The Cornhuskers are the talk of the town now. They had just beat the mighty Oklahoma Sooners. But on November 18th, Nebraska, ranked number 2, got upset by Missouri 35-31. And that Missouri team had what I call at the time 3 triplets. I'm going to start with triplet number 1. James Wilder had 188 yards rushing that game. He had 4 touchdowns. The quarterback, Phil Bradley, who went on and became a first-round pick with the Seattle Mariners in baseball, had 187 yards, and he caused havoc. And then I don't have to say no more. The best tight end that played in the National Football League, Kellen Winslow Sr., had over 138 yards and 6 receptions that day. As Nebraska fell off the hinges as Missouri went in and Lincoln and upset them 35-31. Then it came up to Thanksgiving weekend, November the 23rd to November the 25th. And boy, that was a special weekend because now teams have started jockeying, and we're going to see who's going to be playing in the bowl game. Let's start with Michigan. They sitting there number 6. They undefeated. They go up to Columbus and play Ohio State. And you know what? The senior quarterback, Rick Leach, throws for 2 touchdowns, and they outperformed the freshman sensational Oxleyster. And Michigan is put on the back as they win that football game 14-3, and they are going to the Rose Bowl. But the game of the day was out there in L.A. USC came back in the mix. They moved up to number 3, and they dominated Notre Dame. Charles White has 239 yards rushing in that game. But you know what happened in the 4th quarter? Y'all know who I'm finna mention. He ended up winning 4 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers. Joe Montana went off in the 4th quarter. Notre Dame scored 19 straight points and took the lead. Chris Haynes, the White Lightning receiver, had 8 receptions for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. But you know what? Paul McDonald led USC down the field with over a minute left, and Frank Jordan kicked a 37-yard field goal. And SC wins the football game 27-25. And now we got the Rose Bowl set. It's going to be Michigan, number 5, taking on number 3 USC. Then we go to December the 2nd, the final weekend of college football. The game of the day is all eyes. Down in Birmingham, Alabama. The University of Alabama came back and moved up in the polls. That bounced back from the September the 23rd loss to USC 24-14. And they took it to their in-state rival, the most hated rival in their state, One of the most talked football games in college football, they beat War Eagle, the University of Auburn, 34-16. And you know what? Their senior quarterback, Jeff Rutledge, threw for 2 touchdowns as Alabama defeats Auburn 34-16. They go to the Sugar Bowl, and Penn State goes undefeated for the rest of the year. Now we got the bowl season set. We got January the 1st set. 1979. It's 2 games going to decide the national championship. Alabama taking on Penn State in the Sugar Bowl, and Michigan taking on USC in the Rose Bowl. Well, during that time, I'm home during the Christmas holidays. It's a ritual in the Turner household. My father, Chester, and me sit down and we watch all the bowl games. And my dad sits up. He get a little Bacardi rum at the time, 151. And we talking. He asking me questions. He asked me how that first semester went at the University of Arkansas. And I enjoy those days. And I'm very blessed because my father is still living. He's 84 years old. And he's going to take a look at this video. But back in 78, I was an 18-year-old kid watching college football and being around the people I love, my mother and father, Allen Harris and Chester Turner, down in the 901 in Memphis, Tennessee. Getting to the 2 games that meant a lot. I'm going to start with the Sugar Bowl because it came on early that day. 12 o'clock kickoff Central Time in the Superdome. 78,000. Alabama, Roll Tide, Leonard Skinner in the house. And that was one of the most hardest hitting football games you want to see. You can pull it up on YouTube. But what I took about that football game was 2 plays in that game. Alabama's first touchdown, Jeff Rutledge, 32-yard touchdown to Bruce Bolton right before halftime. And Bruce Bolton, check this out, was from Memphis, Tennessee. He was a senior receiver. And then that Alabama defense. You talking about one of the best defensive performances on any level in any championship game. 5 sacks, 4 INTs. They held Penn State to 19 yards rushing. And then that 4th quarter goal line stand. And all I remember about is that young man from Florida, number 77, Barry Krause, and that curly hairy head coming out of his window under his helmet. And he lunching and stopping Mike Gooman in the air and knocked himself out. And the crowd going crazy. And you're thinking about that Alabama defense. Curtis McGriff, Wayne Hamilton, Marty Lyons, E.J. Jr. from Nashville, Tennessee, Don McNeil, Jim Bob Harris over there from Athens. Alabama wins that game 14-17. We all know they're going to be voted number 1 in one of the polls at the time, either AP or UPI. But all eyes after that game switches over to the Rose Bowl. It's like a 3 o'clock kickoff, Central Time, in my hometown of Memphis. And it just kicked off. And I'm watching USC. They got to make a very impressive performance against Michigan. And you know what? That was another hard-hitting football game. In that game, Charles White, the outstanding tailback for USC, had 99 yards rushing on 32 carries. But boy, that was a hard 99 yards. But it was a controversial play in that game. A lot of people saw it. In the 2nd quarter, Charles White leaps. He loses the ball. One ref holds up touchdown. Another ref rules a fumble. They meet in the middle of the field for about 15 minutes, and they give USC a touchdown. And USC goes and wins the football game 17-10. Bo Schembechler up in the heavens right now was going ballistic. But to be honest with you, USC got a gift that day. And the thing I take back from that football game, it was a freshman linebacker who went on and played with the San Francisco 49ers that put on the show by the name of Ricky Gray, who had 15 tackles that day. So you had 2 teams ranked in the top 3 that won their bowl games. Well, the next day, Alabama's voted number 1 in the AP poll. USC is voted number 1 in the UPI poll, the coaches poll. Based on the strength, they rebounded from that October 14 loss to Arizona State, but they had the trifecta. They went into Birmingham on September 23rd and beat Alabama head to head. So we had a split national championship. Oh my God, that was a special year. But what was so special that year, it was some very special players that played at a high level. So let me give you the All-American teams from 1978. I'm going to start with the offense. At the tight end position was Kellen Winslow Sr. out of Missouri. You know how his career went. Then they had Little Rock Finders, Little Rock Central, Emmanuel Tolbert out of SMU. Then you had at the tackles, you had Ken Dorney out of Penn State. Then you have Kevin Clark out of Nebraska. At guard, you had Pat Howell out of USC. Then you had Greg Roberts out of Boona Sooner. The center was Jim Richard out of North Carolina State. The quarterback, Chuck Fusina out of Penn State, that finished second that year in the Heisman Trophy voting. And at the running back position, there was so many very tight. It was 4 guys that was selected first team All-American. Hook's Texas finest. First round draft pick out of Detroit Lions, Billy Sims, the 1978 Heisman Trophy winner. Then you had Charles White out of San Fernando, California, USC. Then you had the other first team running back, Ted Brown out of North Carolina State, ACC in the house. Then you had the round out LSU, Charles the Great Alexander. Then let me go to the defensive side of the ball. You had the young man at one defensive end position out of Natchez, Mississippi. Same hometown as the great singer Alexander O'Neal, my man Hugh Green. Then you had at the other defensive end, you had the young man coming out of Tempe, Arizona, my man Al Harris. We all remember him about his performance against USC, Arizona State finest. Then you had an unsung hero coming out of the Rockies. Mike Bell was one of the defensive tackles out of Colorado State. Then the other defensive tackle was Mr. Marty Lyons, Roll Tide, Alabama, #1 in the AP poll. Then at the linebacker position, you know you can't have no All-American team back then if you don't have nobody from Notre Dame. Mr. Bob Golek was one linebacker position. One of the best linebackers I ever seen play the game. And boy, it was an honor to see him play it at a high level. Jerry Robinson out of UCLA. Remember that year in his final game, he had 21 tackles against USC. Then the other linebacker that rounded out the first team linebackers, Tom Cousineau, the Ohio State Buckeyes. And we only had 3 defensive backs that made that the first team that year. The first defensive back on the first team All-American squad in 1978, Johnny Johnson, the Eyes of Texas. Boy, he was a football player. Then the next guy that made the list, he put on the show in Division II, Jeff Nixon out of Richmond. And finally, one of the best football players I ever seen, Chesapeake, Virginia. Started as a true freshman at UCLA. 6'3", 205 pounds. Mr. Bobby Butler, you'll love this. A guy that's part of 100 yards of football, who the following year was an All-American at Florida State. He'll love this, what I'm going to say. The young man, 2 words I got to say. Kenty Easley, 6'3", 205. That round out the first team All-American squad. 1978 was special, man. It was my first year on campus at the University of Arkansas, and college football was at the highest level. The thing I take back from 1978 was 2 things. Being a freshman at University of Arkansas, trying to find myself a way around as a man, making new friends from all parts of the country, and growing up and being a man, but most of all, being on a campus that had a team that was ranked #3 in the AP poll in the preseason. The University of Arkansas, they had Ben Cowens, Dan Hampton, Rod Calcagney, Danny Bobo, and Bobby Duckworth. I saw it up close and personal for the first time, what it is to be around football in the South. And that's why football in the South is always going to be the king. I'm sorry. The SEC is always going to be the king. The ACC, football in the South is like a religion. And back then, even though the Southwest Conference they kind of folded, it was still special to see all those players as an 18-year-old freshman at the University of Arkansas. So my final words as I end this video today here on 100 Yards for Football. Excuse me, 100 Yards of Football. The year 1978 is special. That was the year that the Bee Gees had two songs that was really thumping, Staying Alive and Saturday Night Fever, and that great movie that came out. But when I look at it, I'm always going to have this in my mind about 78. You know, it was a gentleman who was considered the greatest entertainer in the game. He was from Gary, Indiana. He went by the initials MJ, Michael Jackson. And he had a song that came out in 1992, Nation to Nation. All the world must come together, face the problems that we see. His name was Michael Jackson. Jam. Don't do it. Jam. Jam. Alabama and USC jammed to the top in 1978. If you like the video this morning, please come in and share it. I'm Vincent Turner with 100 Yards of Football. I'd like to thank my producer this morning, Mr. Jeremiah Long out of Knoxville, Tennessee, for producing all the great graphics, all the great things we have going on here in 100 Yards of Football. But my thing is this. It's a great time. The football season kicks off officially this week. Please check out all the great games that's going to go home locally here in the Metro Atlanta area. Go down to the Dome and see Miami take on Alabama. And when you see that game, run to your favorite sports bar in the Metro Atlanta area and watch the Dogs, Georgia, take on Clemson. I don't have to say no more. I don't have to say no less. It's football time in the state of Georgia. As the great John Ward used to say at the University of Tennessee. Y'all be blessed today here on 100 Yards of Football. I'm ecstatic. I'm happy. I'm hyped. It's football time. What more can you say? Jam like the great Michael Jackson did in 1992 with that great hit. Y'all be blessed.